What's haunting the Paranormal Museum in Asbury Park? Is it the bride and groom whose 100-year-old wedding attire has been observed moving around the museum? Yep, you heard that right. Maybe it's the death mask of young Madeleine, the French girl who tragically died right before her wedding. Or perhaps it's the poor soul whose bones were dug up and desecrated by grave robbers and now reside for all eternity in a cauldron in the Paranormal Museum? Finally, why on earth would Kathy Kelly surround herself with spooky, mysterious, purportedly haunted, and sometimes cursed objects? Discover the answers to these and other mysteries on this episode of Curious Explorers.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
Hey everybody, it's Kathy Kelly from the Paranormal Museum, and I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Tracy Stein. Welcome to another episode of Curious Explorers. You know, as we were sitting here getting ready to start a subject, we had some phenomena that happened that kind of led us into a different subject entirely. We never know when the artifacts at the Paranormal Museum are going to make themselves known through sound or movement or what have you, but it happened. Well, the artifacts decide what they want to do. You know, I'm just kind of here. Well, did you hear that? Or
I did.
it actually sounded like a growl.
No, I heard like thump. I didn't hear the growl. If I heard the growl, I'd be the hell out of there.
Well, like a dog growl. It didn't sound like a scary growl.
Well, that would be scary if I was sitting, but he's not there.
No, he's not.
So it's not Lincoln.
It is not Lincoln. So one of the things that I was saying was unnerving to me right now is the bride and the groom definitely look like they've moved from the last time that I was here. I was here last night, and it definitely looks like, usually she looks like she's moved, but it looks like he moved. They're incredibly difficult to move because they're hard to get to. So when you see it, and he definitely looks like he's turned almost entirely towards her.
You definitely have to.
That's weird. You know, I mean, that's something that's interesting to me. Like, what would that be? You know, I mean, is that a spirit? That doesn't make sense to me that it would be a spirit, but is it something like, is it some energy that's so in tuned with each other that its natural state is to be pulled together? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that there's a man and a woman over there, you know, I just don't, but I do think that there's something of them.
So what you were just saying, you have a number of artifacts and things people have given you in the museum. In today's show, we're going to talk more about that, because last time you and I got together, we talked about how, one, and I agree with you, I don't think that our energy is just in one part. There could be parts of us, maybe we move on, our consciousness moves on, and maybe there's another part that lingers or is attached kind of or around a person or a place or an object that's important to us. You have these two, I guess, mannequins, which would be creepy anyway, to be honest.
They're not
they're forms.
They're dress forms, and they have we call them the bride and groom. They're a little over 100 years old, about 110 years old. One is a gentleman's morning suit.
Morning, like in the morning, not I am.
That's what it's called. Right. Not.
I'm just clarifying for people.
Right.
A
morning suit is a very specific type of tuxedo. And the other is a beautiful, a women's very, very beautiful, very, very delicate lace dress that looks to be, I would say,
a wedding gown.
Teens. Yeah, it's really, it's a gown because there's a veil, but it's very delicate and beautiful, but it's not ornate, right? It's not a big flowing gown. It seems to be more from, I would say, like the 19-teens, right? And not as formal as one might expect.
Victorian.
No, yeah, maybe even a little bit later than that, just pre-roaring 20s kind of thing. So the 19-teens, you know, maybe 1915, 1916. It's very, very delicate. When you start to move it, it literally will just turn to dust. So we don't touch it, and nobody's allowed to touch it. And they've been on the forms since the day after the wedding. and they were in the same family for 100 years. I acquired them a little over a year ago. There's no haunting associated with them. There's no story. There's no trauma. There's no, they didn't die tragic deaths. There's nothing like that that's associated with them. They're just part of the family for 100 years. However, when I acquired them as part of a larger collection, and they're very interesting. And when you're around them, you feel, I don't know, you feel something. What we noticed was when I first got them, because storage is very limited here. I have hundreds of artifacts, but we're a relatively small building. And so we always have to kind of find an interesting way to display things. And it's a lot more like stuff on top of each other than I would like, but that's how it has to be. And it works for us. But I separated them, and immediately we noticed they started moving back towards each other. Now, I didn't separate them and put one in one room and another in another room. I just put them in the room where there was space for them. They're both about 5 feet tall, maybe. They're on a stand right now, which elevates them, but the actual dress form itself is about 5 feet. So if you were standing next to them, Tracy, you'd be a little bit taller than them. I'm a little bit taller than them. But we separated them by about 9 feet. And we noticed that they kept turning towards each other and slowly were moving towards each other.
So each time you came back into the room, they might be a little closer.
Yeah. And honestly,
differently.
there were times when people claimed to see them actually moving. We did get some video where we had the structured light camera on them, which is the SLS camera. She was much more mobile than he was. So it was almost as if he were there and she would be moving towards him. She would turn towards him. However, I was here yesterday. I was working here yesterday, moving some stuff around. We have a new asylum exhibit that we have going in.
As one does.
As one does. We have some stuff from Paveglia in Italy, and we have a portrait of Peter Bryce, who created the first lunatic asylum in Alabama in 1863 to treat soldiers with PTSD. And it was called the Bryce Sanatorium, excuse me. And the painting itself has a reputation. It's not a painting, it's a portrait. He's looking at me right now. Has a reputation for being haunted, but we've decided to kind of create an area for it. But I was here yesterday doing it. So I was very aware of the Bride and Groom, and I'm sitting here now looking at it, and he has definitely moved. Now, one of the things that I have my staff do is we have these little blue X's on the floor, and every time they're doing a tour, they're required to take a picture from that X so that we can see day to day whether or not there's been movement. So it's one of the protocols that we have in place to do it, because the movement is very, very small. I of course, did not take one yesterday because I wasn't, I don't listen to my own rules. But as we were sitting here, I did hear some strange sounds, and just sitting in the same place that I was sitting yesterday, it very much looks as if he's turned and moved towards her, which would be what people claim to have experienced. So
it would be the first and last time I experienced that, just so you know. I don't need to be with weird things moving around when they shouldn't be.
Well, what is it about that scares you? Because we talked about that. Like, is it that the energy is there to enable movement? Like, that is scary, right? That you're talking about something that literally then has the power to manipulate matter.
So let me ask you a question. When you watch a horror movie and the people are scared to death and running out, do you think they're stopping to say, well, what is it about this that's
no, but they're also not doing this professionally, right? So to me, this is what we're doing it for, right? So 100%. It's unnerving because it's unexpected, but it doesn't frighten me because I don't feel like I think, and maybe this is because I've done this for so long, right?
And I think it's because you're you. Because I think 20 years on, I don't think I'd be hanging out with the dead bride. But
here's the thing. I started doing this because I was afraid. I started doing this because I was afraid of everything. And as a kid, I was afraid of every noise. I was afraid of every monster. I was afraid of everything. And I started to realize that if I didn't get a handle on it, it was going to limit me. And so I started putting myself in positions where I'm like, I'm afraid of that. I'm going to figure that out. Right.
I'm going to
And
put it in a place where it's around me all the time,
well,
like a whole
and I'm
bunch of
going
other
to
scary stuff.
Well, I'm going to address it, right? I'm going to address it because I was literally afraid. I couldn't sleep. As a kid, I was afraid of everything. And I'm not anymore. And the reason that I'm not anymore is because even when there is phenomena, I realize that there are limitations to it, right? I realize that there are boundaries. And I also realize that just because I'm afraid of the dog doesn't mean the dog was going to bite me, right?
That's
So
very true.
I don't think the activity's intention is to cause me fear. I think the activity, in other words, if these two items are moving towards each other, I don't think they're doing it for me at all. I think it's because they have a magnetic attraction to each other that is separate entirely from the observer, which is interesting because I'm always bringing the observer into things, right? But all of this stuff happens, generally speaking, when we're not here observing it. We do have a lot of artifacts here that I think go
At the
quiet when they're
Paranormal Museum in Asbury Park,
yes,
New
in Park, New Jersey.
Jersey.
But we do have artifacts that go quiet when people aren't around, right?
So
So
pick one that you really want to talk about, because I've been friends with you for, it feels like 100 years in the best possible way. And I don't know about most of the artifacts.
yeah.
And I think I can later answer part of your question or give a partial answer to your question about why it's scary, potentially.
So I'm going to talk about an artifact that I never talk about, and it's actually not the one that you think I'm going to talk about.
I don't know what's coming. I'm already tense.
Only because I'm thinking about it now,
Well, that's
and
wonderful.
I'm thinking about like observer impact and belief and things like that. But we have an artifact here that is a death mask of a young woman who died in the late 1830s in France. And death masks were very, very popular before photography because if you were a person of middling to greater wealth, it was a way of preserving the likeness of your loved one, right? And then photography came around and memorial photography became popular, especially in the United States. Memorial photography would be literally taking a picture of a body, right? And we have a tendency now to be like, ew, that's so gross. But the truth is that unless you were very wealthy, you were not going to have a portrait taken of your family. No one was going to come and paint your family. And you might be able to afford one photograph and in your entire life. And if you happen to lose your spouse or your child or something like that, this would be the only way you would have that likeness. And so it became very, very popular. It was known as Sleeping Beauty or memorial photography. But prior to that, one of the things that they would do is they would make a death mask. And essentially a death mask would be, they would create a mold immediately following the passing of somebody so that the face was as lifelike as possible. And then they would pour plaster into it and you would be given this cast of your loved one. So you could literally have a three-dimensional view of them. And in this particular case, the young woman's name was Madeleine. Or that's the name that has been ascribed to this. And I don't know how accurate that is, but that's generationally what the name has been. She is very small, very petite. She was very young. I would say she was no more than 21 or 22, if she was that age. She died of consumption, so she was very thin, and her face is somewhat drawn, but she's very beautiful. And the story goes that she was engaged to be married. Her fiance adored her. And after she passed away, he had this death mask of her and he grieved with it and he mourned with it. And he would, speak to it and as if she was there. And this went on for months, if not years. And ultimately he ended up meeting somebody else, overcoming his grief and marrying someone. But Madeleine had become attached to the death mask and had stayed with him through his grief and had essentially created a new life for herself as his companion, with the mask being her anchor
Can I
to
just
this world.
say, isn't it remarkable that a man who has this kind of thing going on could still find somebody? I always find that
Well,
remarkable.
I wonder if though, I think his grief was probably profound for a period of time and then wasn't. I don't think he begged. I think about that a lot.
I
Like a
mean,
lot
just
of
saying,
people
I
that
don't know
come
if
to.
he brought the mask with him and his new wife had to be like, all right,
No, I
it's
don't think
you're
so.
the
No,
mask.
I
Okay,
don't.
that's
I don't
kind of
think
what
so.
I
Although
thought you were talking
no. In
about.
fact, I think that's why the haunting started, was because he essentially packed her away, right? Without the belief or the understanding or the the knowledge that a spirit had actually attached to it. So there's a lot that goes into that, right? And I have a lot of people that come into paranormal. A lot of people come into paranormal because of grief, right? They come into the shop because of grief, and they come into the subject matter because of grief, right? So generally speaking, a lot of times what you have to say to somebody when they're so grief stricken is your grief can actually stop your loved one from elevating, from moving on. And whether that's true or not, when grief is so debilitating,
No, I think it
um,
actually is true.
no, I do too, but to the greater to everybody else out there, you don't have to believe this. You
No.
don't have to believe this. In my experience, I believe that it's true, right? This, however, is like case in point, right? Where his grief was so great and his love was so great, and he was probably 22 or 23 himself, and he probably poured all of his love and all of his grief and all of his loss into this object that looked like her. And please come back to me, please don't leave me, I miss you, I miss you. And that spirit, that person who probably was cognizant that she was going to die, she had consumption, she was probably aware of it, saw an opportunity to stay in some way. And then, as he moved on, she had lost her opportunity to move on without assistance, right? So we have this artifact here. I actually have it on display by the bride and the groom, and it was there before they were. Now, the interesting thing is we have two women in white that we have two items that are associated with the women in white. Madeleine is a woman in white, meaning that when people see her, they see her as a small, petite female, very, very pale, in like wispy, kind of traditionally ghostly kind of phenomena. She looks like a traditional ghost. She's a woman in white. And then
She
we
got the
also have
memo.
and folklore has very specific ways that people become specific types of spirits or types of phenomena. And we also have a woman who has passed away during childbirth. We have her gravestone here. She's also a woman in white. Now, the interesting thing is, around Madeleine, we get EVPs speaking French. Now, that is interesting. And that is, I would say, evidentiary, right? I would look at that and say, Madeleine's from France. We also have a murder weapon, though, from a murder that took place in the 1880s, where
Unrelated to Madeleine.
unrelated to Madeleine, the murderer was actually a Frenchman. And so we don't know we don't know where the French is coming from. And the presumption is that it's coming from one of these two artifacts. But in speaking of the Madeleine's artifact, I find it very poignant. There are a lot of people who are like, well, why don't you try to move her on? Or why don't you try to do, I prefer to think of our place as a home for wayward ghosts, where you're welcome to come and you're welcome to stay. And any kind of assistance that we can give, we give, and I do from time to time feel something around that mask that I don't always feel. And because I don't always feel it, it's much more compelling when I do.
I would
And,
love you to
and
put a camera on it. Just
I
leave
have
it
cameras
on
on
like
it.
a
Yeah, I
week.
have
Oh, you
cameras.
do? Okay.
Yeah, I have cameras on everything in here. But visual phenomena doesn't generally happen. I mean, it's very, very rare to have visual phenomena. Audio phenomena is a little bit more, but the most commonly reported is a sense of presence. And I also think that a lot of people, people have feelings and they just get a vibe. They'll have an emotional reaction to something and not know. The interesting thing about Madeleine, though, is people have a emotional reaction to her when they can't see her. They don't even know that she's in there, and then because she's in a casket, and you don't know that there's anything in there until we open it up. And people they'll have a very similar kind of melancholia, where there's this sadness, and it's not grief, but kind of just a
moved. They're really
yeah, and
moved.
lamentation. Yeah, there's like a lamentation, not an unhappiness, but a kind of a lingering sadness. And then when you open it up, they're not surprised. And I will say it's unnerving to see it because she's very lifelike. And now the mask has patina to it. That's interesting. That gives it a lifelikeness to it. I have other death masks here as well, but that's the one that's the most compelling. And I'm not really sure why I chose to talk about it today. I think it's because we were talking about spirits choosing to linger and then kind of maybe losing the opportunity. You know what I mean? Or the easiness to move on.
So I have a few questions and thoughts for you, Kathy, as I'm sure many people would. One, I just want you to know that you're my only friend to ever say, we have several death masks here. You're truly an of one. But I'm wondering, because we've talked about this before, is it the residue? Is it her essence that's there? Is it part of the residual energy of her groom, who infused so much of his emotional energy and intense emotions, right? Like sadness is a more intense emotion than run-of-the-mill contentment, right? Or, or like, oh, I miss you. It's intense. And I feel like that might leave a residue. Is it, I don't know, like, is it a thought form? Because there's so much talking about her. I don't know.
In this case, and very specifically this case, I think it's her. Very specifically, I think it's her.
So not just like a aspect of her. You think she's still hanging out waiting for him?
And I don't. No. I don't think she's. I don't think she's looking for him. I think this is where she is, and I don't know that she's here all the time. And I would say there's one or two objects that I feel that way about, where it's like it's their touchstone to this, to be present, right? So it's an artifact that it's a touchstone. It's my home. It's my vessel. I have a couple of artifacts here that people have brought to me that, and generally in these cases, they're negative. They have negative, people have negative reactions to them.
You literally read my mind, because that's what I was going to ask you about. The difference between talking about things like Madeleine's mask and the Bride and Groom versus some of the other stuff that doesn't really evoke the same response.
So to me, this is a touchstone for her, right? It's what enables her. It's like a beacon, right? It's what enables her to come back. And that's where my thing is. I know where that is. It's my calling card. I can go there. I have I have a lot of other artifacts that have been donated or given. Donated is kind of a fancy word. A lot of times it's like, take this stupid thing,
Please take it.
No, seriously, like take this.
Grabbing by and tossing it out of the car window.
Or I've tried to do that and it keeps coming back to me. So I have a few of those where I've actually said to people, and this is a test for me, where I say to someone, why didn't you throw it out? Or why didn't you destroy it? Or something like that. And people will say, because then it would be free. And so they have this understanding.
Free, like unrestrained.
Yeah, like it would be released. And so they have this kind of feeling or this understanding that whatever energy is attached or associated is limited by the vessel that it's in. And they literally see these things as a vessel, right? And I respect that. And I feel like if a person comes to me with that, and with that as an understanding, I'm going to respect that they know what they're talking about, and I'm gonna treat it that way. I have an artifact from New Orleans that is associated with a terrible tragedy, but the family kept it for years and years as part of kind of this it was just an architectural detail from a family home, and they all took different pieces, and this happened to be a kind of macabre piece. But they started to notice that whenever they were all together around it, they were always fighting, and that violence would ensue. And so finally, the woman that had it, she was just like, I know this is the origination of these fights and this anger that we have. So I said, oh, okay, I'll take it. And I said, but why don't you just throw it out? Why don't you destroy it? And she was like, because then it would be free, and whether she's right or she's wrong, she believes it. And I think that that's powerful. And to make a trip to donate it to
You.
to a place where you would be sure it wouldn't be destroyed. She didn't leave it in the basement somewhere. She was like, I need this to go to somebody that will understand the importance of not allowing this to happen. And we have another artifact that is much, much more powerful than that was essentially given to us by a police officer for the same reason, which was, I can't trust this to be out in the world on its own. I have to be able to trust you to not use it and not destroy it. And that's the cauldron, which I think is one of the most active and powerful pieces that we have here, and it's one of the few pieces that I'm like, nope, I 100% buy it. I am all in on the story because I've seen the phenomena, experienced the phenomena, heard the phenomena, and there's no way around it.
Listen.
This is the Paranormal Museum, located at 621 Cookman Avenue in Asbury Park's historic downtown district. The building itself has a reputation for being haunted, but the reason why we think you should come and visit is not only do we have an amazing bookstore full of wonderful titles pertaining to the paranormal, but we also have the Paranormal Museum. The Paranormal Museum is celebrating its 15th year this year. Why not stop by our website and book a private tour?